The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Captain James Morrison received the most unusual order of his 20-year career. The head of palace security, Sir Richard Whitmore, stood before him with a grave expression that made Morrison's stomach tighten with worry. "Captain, we need you to conduct a thorough inspection of the Queen Consort's private chambers," Sir Richard announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Morrison felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. In all his years protecting the royal family, he had never been asked to search a royal's personal quarters. The very idea seemed to go against everything he believed about respect and protocol. "Sir, may I ask what this concerns?" Morrison inquired carefully, choosing his words like a diplomat walking through a minefield. Sir Richard's weathered face showed the strain of sleepless nights. Dark circles under his eyes told a story of worry and mounting pressure. "The Crown Jewels collection has some missing pieces, very valuable ones. The investigation has led us to believe they might be somewhere in the palace itself." The news hit Morrison like a physical blow. The crown jewels were more than just expensive trinkets. They represented centuries of British history, tradition, and national pride. The thought that someone inside the palace walls might have taken them was almost too shocking to believe. "Which pieces are missing, sir?" Morrison asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sir Richard pulled out a leather folder and opened it with trembling hands. The Koh-i-Noor diamond from Queen Mary's crown, the St. Edward's sapphire, and 3 emerald brooches that belonged to Queen Victoria herself. Together, they're worth more than £50 million, but their historical value is beyond measure. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. These weren't just missing objects. They were pieces of England's soul. The Koh-i-Noor diamond alone had a history spanning over 600 years, passing through the hands of emperors and kings before finding its home in the British crown. "When were they discovered missing?" Morrison asked, trying to piece together a timeline in his mind. 3 days ago, during the routine monthly inspection of the jewel collection," Sir Richard explained. "At first, we thought they might have been moved for cleaning or some special display. But after checking every possible location, we realized they had simply vanished." The captain's mind raced through possibilities. Inside the palace, security was tighter than a bank vault. Every person who entered or left was monitored, searched, and documented. The idea that someone could simply walk out with priceless royal jewels seemed impossible, yet here they were, dealing with exactly that situation. "Have you questioned the staff who had access to the jewels?" Morrison inquired, though he felt uncomfortable asking about people he had worked with for years. Sir Richard nodded grimly. "We've spoken to everyone who works in the jewelry storage area, the cleaning staff, the guards, even the historians who catalog the collection. Everyone checks out clean, and their stories all match perfectly." Morrison understood why they needed to search Camilla's chambers, though the very thought made him uncomfortable. As Queen Consort, she had more access to the royal treasures than almost anyone else. She often wore pieces from the collection for official events and ceremonies. "Sir, with all due respect, surely the Queen Consort wouldn't," Morrison began, but Sir Richard raised his hand to stop him. "Captain, we're not suggesting anything improper, but we need to search everywhere, including places that might seem unlikely. The royal family understands this necessity. In fact, Queen Camilla herself insisted that her chambers be searched to help clear up this mystery." This information surprised Morrison. If Camilla had volunteered to have her rooms searched, it suggested she was as concerned about the missing jewels as everyone else. It also showed her understanding of how serious the situation had become. "When do we conduct this search?" Morrison asked, already mentally preparing for what would surely be one of the strangest days of his career. "This afternoon, when Her Majesty is attending the charity luncheon in London," Sir Richard replied. "We'll have approximately 3 hours to conduct a thorough but respectful search of her private quarters." Morrison spent the rest of the morning assembling his team. He chose his most trusted and experienced guards, men who had proven their discretion and professionalism over many years of service. Each team member was briefed about the sensitivity of their mission and sworn to absolute secrecy. Sergeant Davies, a Scottish man with 30 years of military experience, would handle the bedroom area. Corporal Chen, known for his attention to detail, would search the sitting room and study. Morrison himself would oversee the operation and search the most private areas, including Camilla's jewelry collection and personal safe. As the afternoon approached, Morrison felt his nervousness growing. Searching a royal's private chambers felt like crossing a line he had never imagined crossing. These rooms held personal items, private letters, family photographs, and memories that had nothing to do with crown jewels or state business. At exactly 2 o'clock, as Camilla's motorcade disappeared through the palace gates heading for London, Morrison and his team made their way to the Queen Consort's chambers. The ornate double doors, decorated with gold leaf and royal crests, seemed to stand guard over the private world within. Morrison used his master key to open the doors, and the team stepped inside what felt like entering a different world. The rooms were elegant but comfortable, filled with personal touches that made them feel like a real home rather than a museum display. The sitting room contained comfortable sofas covered in soft fabrics, family photographs in silver frames, and books scattered on side tables. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and the air carried the subtle scent of Camilla's favorite perfume. "Remember," Morrison addressed his team quietly, "we treat everything with the utmost respect. We're looking for missing crown jewels, nothing else. If we find anything personal that doesn't relate to our search, we pretend we never saw it." The search began methodically. They examined every drawer, every cabinet, every possible hiding place where valuable jewels might be concealed. Morrison's hands shook slightly as he opened Camilla's jewelry boxes, half expecting to find the missing treasures sparkling up at him. But the first hour of searching revealed nothing unusual. Camilla's personal jewelry collection contained beautiful pieces, many of them gifts from family members or items with sentimental value, but nothing from the crown jewels collection. Sergeant Davies searched through the bedroom with the care of an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts. He looked under the mattress, behind picture frames, inside lamp bases, and in every corner where something small and valuable might be hidden. His search revealed only the normal items one would expect to find in anyone's bedroom. Corporal Chen worked through the study and sitting room with equal care. He examined books to see if they had been hollowed out to create hiding places, checked behind paintings for secret compartments, and even looked inside the cushions of chairs and sofas. Like his colleague, he found nothing suspicious. As the second hour passed, Morrison began to feel a mixture of relief and confusion. Relief because they weren't finding evidence that might implicate the Queen Consort in the theft. Confusion because if the jewels weren't here, where could they possibly be? The team was about to conclude their search when Corporal Chen called out from the study. "Captain, you should see this," he said, his voice carrying a note of excitement mixed with concern. Morrison hurried to the study, his heart pounding with anticipation. Chen was standing beside an antique writing desk, its top drawer pulled open. Inside the drawer, nestled among letters and personal papers, was something that made Morrison's blood run cold. It was a small velvet pouch, the kind used to store valuable jewelry. The pouch bore the official seal of the Crown Jewels collection, marking it as property of the royal treasury. Morrison's hands trembled as he picked up the pouch, feeling its weight and wondering what secrets it might contain. "Should I open it, sir?" Chen asked quietly, his voice reflecting the tension that filled the room. Morrison nodded. though part of him dreaded what they might find inside. Chen carefully loosened the drawstring and opened the pouch. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, were 3 emerald brooches that Morrison immediately recognized from photographs he had seen during security briefings. The emerald brooches that had belonged to Queen Victoria herself were sitting in Queen Camilla's desk drawer, hidden away like guilty secrets. The discovery hit Morrison like a thunderbolt, sending his mind reeling with questions and implications. "Sir," Davies called from the bedroom, his voice urgent, "I think you need to see this as well." Morrison and Chen rushed to the bedroom, where Davies was standing beside Camilla's dressing table. In his hands was another velvet pouch, this one larger than the first. The same official seal marked it as belonging to the Crown Jewels collection. With growing dread, Morrison opened the second pouch. Inside, the St. Edward's sapphire caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, its deep blue color seeming to hold centuries of royal history within its faceted surface. 2 of the 3 missing pieces had been found in the Queen Consort's private chambers, hidden among her personal belongings like stolen treasure. Morrison felt his world shifting beneath his feet as he tried to process what this discovery might mean. "Keep searching," he ordered his team, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "We need to find the Koh-i-Noor diamond." The next 30 minutes felt like hours as the team conducted an even more thorough search of every possible hiding place in the chambers. They looked behind mirrors, inside picture frames, within the lining of jewelry boxes, and in places so obscure that Morrison felt almost silly checking them. Finally, Davies found what they were looking for. Hidden inside a decorative vase that sat on Camilla's nightstand was the 3rd velvet pouch. Morrison's hands shook as he opened it, revealing the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond sparkling like a captured star. All 3 missing pieces of the Crown Jewels collection had been found in Queen Camilla's private chambers, hidden in different locations, as if someone had deliberately tried to conceal them. The discovery left Morrison feeling sick to his stomach and utterly confused about what could possibly explain this situation. Morrison stood frozen in the Queen Consort's bedroom, staring at the 3 velvet pouches that contained the missing crown jewels. His mind struggled to process what this discovery could possibly mean. The implications were staggering, and each possible explanation seemed more troubling than the last. "What do we do now, Captain?" Sergeant Davies asked quietly, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious uncertainty. Morrison realized he was facing the most difficult decision of his career. They had found the missing jewels exactly where they had been asked to look, but the discovery raised far more questions than it answered. How had these priceless artifacts ended up hidden in Camilla's private chambers? And more importantly, who had put them there? "We follow protocol," Morrison finally answered, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "We secure the evidence and report our findings immediately to Sir Richard." As the team carefully photographed each pouch and its contents before sealing them in evidence bags, Morrison's mind raced through possible explanations. Perhaps Camilla had borrowed the pieces for some private occasion and forgotten to return them. Maybe she was planning to surprise someone with them at a special event. Or possibly, someone else had placed them in her chambers to deflect suspicion from themselves. The walk back to Sir Richard's office felt like a funeral march. Morrison carried the evidence bags containing the recovered jewels, each step echoing through the palace corridors like an accusation. Other staff members they passed seemed to sense something momentous had happened, stepping aside with worried glances. Sir Richard's face went pale when Morrison placed the evidence bags on his desk. The older man sank into his chair as if the weight of the discovery had physically pressed down upon him. For several long minutes, he simply stared at the recovered treasures without speaking. "This changes everything," Sir Richard finally whispered. "We need to inform the king immediately, and we'll need to speak with Queen Camilla the moment she returns from London." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of confronting a member of the royal family about potentially stolen jewels was beyond anything he had ever imagined. In his years of service, he had always seen the royals as people to protect and serve, not to investigate or interrogate. "Sir, surely there must be some innocent explanation," Morrison ventured, hoping against hope that this nightmare scenario could somehow be resolved without scandal. Sir Richard's expression remained grim. "Captain, I've been in royal service for 40 years. And I've learned that when something looks impossible, the truth is usually more complicated than anyone expects. We need to approach this carefully and fairly, but we cannot ignore what you've found." While they waited for Camilla's return from London, Sir Richard began making the necessary phone calls. First, he spoke privately with King Charles, delivering the shocking news in hushed tones that Morrison could only partially overhear. The king's response was inaudible, but Sir Richard's increasingly tense expression suggested the conversation was not going well. Next came calls to the palace's legal advisors and the head of the royal household. Each conversation seemed to add another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Morrison began to understand that this discovery would have consequences far beyond the palace walls. As afternoon turned to evening, news arrived that Camilla's motorcade was returning from London. Morrison felt his stomach twist with anxiety as he realized the confrontation was about to begin. Sir Richard asked him to remain present during the meeting, both as the officer who had made the discovery and as a witness to whatever explanation might be offered. Queen Camilla entered Sir Richard's office with her usual graceful composure, but Morrison noticed her smile fade quickly when she saw the serious expressions on their faces. Her eyes immediately went to the evidence bags on the desk, and Morrison watched her face carefully for any sign of recognition or guilt. "Sir Richard, I can see this is something serious," Camilla said, settling into a chair with the dignity that comes from years of public service. "I assume this relates to your search of my chambers this afternoon?" Sir Richard cleared his throat nervously before responding. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid we made some discoveries during our search that require explanation. We found these items hidden in your private quarters." He carefully opened each evidence bag, displaying the emerald brooches, the St. Edward sapphire, and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Morrison watched Camilla's face intently, looking for any reaction that might provide insight into her involvement. To his surprise, Camilla's expression showed genuine shock and confusion rather than guilt or fear. Her eyes widened as she looked at each piece, and her hand went to her throat in what appeared to be authentic surprise. "I have absolutely no idea how those came to be in my chambers," she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being believed. "I haven't seen any of these pieces since the last state dinner, and they were properly returned to the treasury afterward." Morrison found himself believing her immediate response. In his experience, guilty people usually tried to explain too much or became defensive. Camilla's reaction seemed like that of someone genuinely bewildered by the discovery. Sir Richard leaned forward in his chair. "Your Majesty, can you think of anyone who might have had access to your chambers and could have placed these items there?" Camilla considered the question carefully before answering. "Several people have access to my private quarters, of course. My lady's maid, Margaret, has been with me for 15 years and has complete access. The cleaning staff comes through twice weekly. Palace maintenance workers occasionally need to service various systems, and naturally, security personnel like Captain Morrison have master keys." The mention of so many people with access made Morrison realize how complicated this investigation was about to become. Any one of dozens of people could potentially have hidden the jewels in Camilla's chambers, either to steal them or to implicate her in their disappearance. "Ma'am," Morrison interjected respectfully, "have you noticed anything unusual in your chambers recently? Any sign that someone had been there when you weren't?" Camilla thought for a moment. Actually, now that you mention it, there have been a few small things. Last week, I found one of my jewelry boxes slightly out of place on my dressing table, and a few days ago, some papers on my desk seemed to have been moved. But I assumed it was just the cleaning staff being a bit careless. This information made Morrison's detective instincts come alive. Someone had clearly been in Camilla's chambers, moving things around and possibly planting the missing jewels over a period of several days or weeks. But who and why? Sir Richard asked the question that Morrison knew was coming. Your Majesty, would you be willing to take a polygraph examination to help clear this matter up? Camilla straightened in her chair, and Morrison could see both dignity and determination in her posture. Of course I would. I have nothing to hide, and I want this matter resolved as much as anyone. My reputation and the integrity of the royal family depend on getting to the truth. Over the next 2 hours, they discussed the logistics of a broader investigation. Sir Richard explained that they would need to interview everyone who had access to Camilla's chambers, review security footage from the past month, and conduct background checks on all palace staff members who might have been involved. Morrison volunteered to coordinate the staff interviews, feeling a personal responsibility to get to the bottom of the mystery. He had served these people for years, and the idea that one of them might be a thief felt like a personal betrayal. As the meeting concluded, Camilla stood to leave but paused at the door. Sir Richard, Captain Morrison, I want you both to know that I understand how difficult this situation must be for you. Please don't let any concern for my feelings prevent you from conducting a thorough investigation. The truth is more important than protocol. After Camilla left, Morrison and Sir Richard sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. The evidence clearly showed that the missing jewels had been found in her chambers, but her reaction and cooperation suggested she was as much a victim of this situation as anyone else. "What's your gut feeling, Captain?" Sir Richard asked finally. Morrison chose his words carefully. "Sir, in my experience, guilty people don't volunteer for polygraph tests or encourage thorough investigations. Someone definitely put those jewels in her chambers, but I don't believe it was the Queen Consort herself." Sir Richard nodded slowly. "I agree, but we still need to prove it. Tomorrow, we begin interviewing everyone who had access to those chambers. We'll also need to review every piece of security footage from the past month and look for any patterns or unusual activity." That evening, Morrison went home to his small apartment near the palace, but sleep eluded him completely. His mind kept turning over the day's events, trying to piece together how the jewels had ended up where they did. Someone with access to both the Crown Jewels treasury and Camilla's private chambers had orchestrated this situation. But who? He thought about Margaret, Camilla's lady's maid, who had served the royal family faithfully for 15 years. He considered the cleaning staff, most of whom had worked at the palace for decades. He even thought about his own security team, men he trusted with his life, but who technically had the access and opportunity to commit this crime. The next morning, Morrison arrived early at the palace to begin the investigation in earnest. Sir Richard had arranged for a private interview room where they could speak with each potential suspect without causing alarm among the rest of the staff. The first interview was with Margaret, Camilla's lady's maid. Morrison had known her for years and had always found her to be professional, discreet, and utterly loyal to the royal family. The idea that she might be involved in stealing crown jewels seemed almost ridiculous. Margaret entered the interview room looking nervous but determined. Her gray hair was perfectly arranged despite the early hour, and her posture reflected years of training in royal service. Morrison could see the worry in her eyes, but also a kind of indignation that suggested she understood why she was being questioned and didn't like it. "Margaret," Sir Richard began gently, "as you know, we're investigating the disappearance of some items from the Crown Jewels collection. We need to ask you some questions about your access to Queen Camilla's chambers." Margaret straightened in her chair. Sir Richard, I've been caring for members of this family for 15 years, and I've never taken so much as a button that didn't belong to me. If you think I would steal from the crown jewels, you don't know me at all. Morrison appreciated her direct response, but he also noticed that she seemed more hurt than surprised by the questioning. Most innocent people would have been shocked to learn about the theft, but Margaret's reaction suggested she already knew about the missing jewels. Margaret, Morrison said carefully, when did you first learn that items were missing from the royal collection? She hesitated for a moment before answering. I heard whispers among the staff 3 days ago. Word travels fast in a place like this, even when people try to keep secrets. This information was interesting, but not necessarily incriminating. Palace staff did tend to hear about significant events quickly, often before official announcements were made. However, Morrison made a mental note to verify exactly when the theft became common knowledge among the staff. The interview continued for another hour, with Margaret providing detailed information about her daily routines, her access to various parts of the palace, and her observations about any unusual activity in recent weeks. Morrison found her answers consistent and believable, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. After 3 days of intensive interviews, Morrison felt like he was chasing shadows. Every staff member they questioned had solid alibis and seemed genuinely shocked about the theft. The cleaning staff, maintenance workers, and even junior security guards all checked out clean. Their stories matched, their backgrounds were spotless, and none of them showed any signs of living beyond their means. Morrison sat in Sir Richard's office reviewing the case files when something caught his attention. Among the security footage from the past month, he noticed a pattern that had initially seemed insignificant. Dr. Helena Ashworth, the palace's chief historian and curator of the Crown Jewels collection, had been working unusually late hours and accessing restricted areas at odd times. Dr. Ashworth was a respected academic who had worked at the palace for 8 years. She was responsible for cataloging and maintaining the historical records of all royal treasures, which gave her unprecedented access to the crown jewels. Morrison had always found her to be professional and knowledgeable, but something about her recent behavior patterns didn't feel right. Sir Richard, Morrison said, pointing to the security logs on his computer screen. Look at Dr. Ashworth's access patterns over the past month. She's been in the jewel storage area during non-standard hours at least 12 times. Sir Richard leaned over Morrison's shoulder to examine the data. That is unusual. But she often works late when preparing for exhibitions or conducting research. Did you check what projects she was working on? Morrison pulled up another file. According to her official schedule, she wasn't assigned to any projects that would require extended access to the storage areas. In fact, her only recent assignment was updating the digital catalog of Victorian-era pieces, which she could have done from her office using existing photographs. The pattern became even more interesting when Morrison cross-referenced Dr. Ashworth's late-night access times with the security footage from Camilla's wing of the palace. On 3 separate occasions, cameras had captured someone matching her height and build, walking through corridors near the Queen Consort's chambers during evening hours when those areas should have been empty. I think we need to have a conversation with Dr. Ashworth, Sir Richard said grimly. Morrison felt a mixture of excitement and dread as they prepared for what could be the most important interview of the investigation. If Dr. Ashworth was involved, it would explain how someone could have accessed both the crown jewels and Camilla's private chambers without raising immediate suspicion. Dr. Ashworth arrived at the interview room looking composed but slightly defensive. She was a tall, elegant woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a professional bun. Her academic credentials were impressive, and her knowledge of royal history was considered among the best in Britain. Morrison found it hard to imagine her as a jewel thief. Dr. Ashworth, Sir Richard began formally. We're investigating the recent disappearance of items from the Crown Jewels collection. As the collection's primary curator, we need to understand your recent access patterns and any observations you might have made. Dr. Ashworth's composure faltered slightly. Of course, I'm happy to help with the investigation. I was devastated to learn that pieces from our collection had gone missing. Morrison noticed that she said, "our collection," with a possessiveness that seemed to go beyond professional responsibility. It was a small detail, but in his experience, such slips of language often revealed deeper emotional connections. "Doctor," Morrison said, "our security logs show that you accessed the storage areas 12 times in the past month during non-standard hours. Can you explain what you were doing during those visits?" Dr. Ashworth hesitated, and Morrison could see her mind working quickly to formulate an answer. "I've been conducting detailed condition assessments of several pieces in preparation for a comprehensive conservation report. Some of this work requires special lighting conditions that are best achieved during evening hours when there's less ambient light from the windows." The explanation sounded reasonable, but Morrison's instincts told him something was off. "Do you have documentation of these condition assessments? Photographs, notes, reports?" Another hesitation. "Some of my preliminary notes are still being compiled. The assessment process is quite detailed and requires multiple observations over time to be accurate." Sir Richard leaned forward. "Dr. Ashworth, we also have security footage showing someone matching your description in areas near Queen Camilla's chambers during evening hours. Can you explain your presence in those areas?" This time, Dr. Ashworth's composure cracked noticeably. Her face flushed, and her hands began to tremble slightly. Morrison recognized the signs of someone whose carefully constructed story was beginning to fall apart. "I occasionally take different routes through the palace when working late," she stammered. "Sometimes I visit the library in that wing to reference historical documents that aren't available in digital format." Morrison and Sir Richard exchanged glances. The library Dr. Ashworth mentioned was located nowhere near the areas where she had been spotted on camera. Her explanation was not only weak, but demonstrably false. "Doctor," Morrison said gently, "I think it would be best if you told us the truth about what's been happening. We know the missing jewels were found in Queen Camilla's chambers, and we know you had access to both the storage areas and her private quarters. Help us understand how this situation developed." For a long moment, Dr. Ashworth sat in silence, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Morrison could see internal struggle playing out across her features as she wrestled with whatever secrets she had been carrying. Finally, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "I never meant for Queen Camilla to be implicated. That was never part of the plan." The admission hit Morrison like a physical blow. After days of investigation, they had finally found their culprit, but her words suggested the story was far more complicated than a simple theft. "What plan, Doctor?" Sir Richard asked quietly. Dr. Ashworth took a shuddering breath before continuing. "6 months ago, I discovered irregularities in the collection's insurance documentation. Some pieces were listed with values significantly below their true worth, and a few items weren't properly insured at all. I brought these concerns to my supervisor, but nothing was done to address them." Morrison began to understand where this story might be heading. "So you decided to take matters into your own hands?" "I thought if some pieces went temporarily missing, it would force a complete audit of the collection and expose the insurance problems," Dr. Ashworth explained, her voice growing stronger as she finally unburdened herself. "I never intended to actually steal anything. I was planning to discover the missing pieces in a few weeks and use that discovery to highlight the security and documentation issues." Sir Richard's face showed a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. "Doctor, you do realize that your good intentions don't justify theft, even temporary theft, of priceless national treasures?" Dr. Ashworth nodded miserably. "I know how it looks, and I know what I did was wrong. but I was genuinely trying to protect the collection from larger problems that no one seemed willing to address. Morrison still had questions about the most troubling aspect of the case. "Doctor, why did you hide the jewels in Queen Camilla's chambers? Surely you knew that would make her a suspect." Fresh tears began flowing down Dr. Ashworth's face. "That was never supposed to happen. I had originally hidden the pieces in a storage room in the basement, wrapped in old cleaning supplies where no one would think to look. But last week, I heard rumors that security was planning to search every area of the palace. I panicked and moved them to what I thought would be a temporary hiding place." "You chose the Queen Consort's chambers as a temporary hiding place?" Sir Richard asked incredulously. "I knew her rooms would be the last place anyone would search because of protocol and respect," Dr. Ashworth explained. "I was planning to move them again within a few days, but then I heard that you were actually going to search her quarters. By then it was too late to retrieve them without being caught." Morrison felt a wave of anger on behalf of Queen Camilla, who had been put through the humiliation and stress of being a theft suspect because of Dr. Ashworth's poor planning. "Doctor, do you understand that you could have destroyed an innocent woman's reputation with your scheme?" Dr. Ashworth buried her face in her hands. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not Queen Camilla. I respect her tremendously, and knowing that I put her through this ordeal is the worst part of everything I've done." Over the next 2 hours, Dr. Ashworth provided a complete confession detailing exactly how she had carried out her plan. She explained how she had used her legitimate access to remove the 3 pieces from storage, how she had initially hidden them in the basement, and how her panic had led to the disastrous decision to move them to Camilla's chambers. She also provided extensive documentation about the insurance irregularities that had motivated her actions. Morrison had to admit that her concerns about the collection's protection were legitimate, even though her methods had been completely inappropriate. Sir Richard asked the question that would determine Dr. Ashworth's fate. "Doctor, are you prepared to make a formal confession and accept responsibility for your actions?" Without hesitation, she nodded. "Yes, I want to make this right, even though I know there's no way to undo the damage I've caused." Later that afternoon, Morrison accompanied Sir Richard to deliver the news to Queen Camilla. They found her in her private sitting room, reading correspondence and trying to maintain her normal routine despite the stress of the past few days. "Your Majesty," Sir Richard began, "we've solved the mystery of the missing crown jewels, and I'm pleased to tell you that you are completely cleared of any suspicion." The relief on Camilla's face was immediate and profound. Morrison could see tension leaving her shoulders as the weight of suspicion was finally lifted from her. They explained Dr. Ashworth's confession and her misguided attempt to expose problems in the collection's management. Camilla listened quietly, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief at the elaborate scheme that had made her an unwitting victim. "I feel sorry for Dr. Ashworth," Camilla said when they finished their explanation. "Her concerns about the collection's protection seem to have been legitimate, even though her methods were terribly wrong. What will happen to her now?" Sir Richard explained that Dr. Ashworth would face criminal charges for theft, even though the pieces had been recovered and she had confessed. However, her cooperation and the mitigating circumstances of her motivations might result in a more lenient sentence than if she had been stealing for personal gain. As Morrison walked back to his office, he reflected on the strange case that had consumed his thoughts for nearly a week. Dr. Ashworth's plan had been elaborate and well-intentioned, but her execution had been disastrously flawed. Her attempt to protect the crown jewels had nearly destroyed an innocent woman's reputation and had certainly ended her own career. The investigation had also revealed real problems with the collection's insurance and security documentation that would now need to be addressed. In a twisted way, Dr. Ashworth's scheme had accomplished its original goal of forcing attention to these issues, though at a cost far higher than anyone could have imagined. Morrison made a mental note to recommend that procedures be put in place to ensure that legitimate concerns about collection management could be raised and addressed through proper channels, preventing future situations where well-meaning employees might feel driven to such desperate measures. 3 weeks later, Morrison received word that Dr. Ashworth had been sentenced to 2 years of community service and banned from working with any museum or historical collection. The judge had taken into account her confession, cooperation, and the fact that her motivations had been protective rather than greedy. The insurance and security issues she had identified were being comprehensively addressed, and new protocols were being established for collection management concerns. Queen Camilla had personally requested that these improvements be made in recognition that Dr. Ashworth's underlying concerns had been valid. Morrison never forgot the case of the missing crown jewels, and it taught him valuable lessons about the complexity of human motivations and the importance of looking beyond obvious explanations. Sometimes the most shocking crimes were committed by people trying to do the right thing in completely the wrong way.